Hello, welcome to the Bayesian Conspiracy. I'm Iniash Brodsky, and Stephen isn't going to be joining us until later today due to a holdup with a brand new house that he just bought. But on the line with me, I have I'm sorry, pronounce your last name?
Anthony Aguirre.
Anthony Aguirre. And Anthony, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm a professor of physics at UC Santa Cruz, and I'm also one of the founders of the Future of Life Institute, as well as one of the founders of Metaculus.com, which we'll be talking about today, I guess.
Yes, you're here mainly to talk about Metaculus, but briefly, I didn't realize that you were a co-founder of the Future of Life Institute. Could you speak about that quickly as well?
Yeah, so the Future of Life Institute started a few years ago, and Metaculus was actually sort of a spin-off of that, because when we first started thinking about, this really big question of what does the long-term future hold in terms of these basic new technologies, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, old high-impact technologies like nuclear. And we were thinking, how do we find leverage points now where we can maybe nudge a little bit and steer things in a better direction? It occurred to me that, what we really want to do is have a better way of predicting things. We make predictions all the time. The idea that we can't predict the future is just sort of false. We do it as a matter of course all the time in making pretty much every decision we make. Mm-hmm. But we're used to making predictions about certain things, like if I pick this up, it will lift, and if I move my hand this way, it will move that thing over there. There are all kinds of predictions that we just constantly make. And then when we have to make decisions, we get a little bit more, it gets a little bit harder, where we maybe plan out, well, if I do this versus if I do that, what will happen with option A versus what will happen with option B. Then predicting what will happen in each of those cases, I might make a decision as to which outcome is sort of more favorable to my goals or to my happiness or whatever. Mm-hmm. But we're doing this all the time. And that's sort of how one has to make decisions, whether you like it or not. You're making predictions when you're making decisions.
I think
so. It seemed to me.
I think you used. I think you used the phrase to me before that, like, human brains are little prediction-making engines. That's what they do.
That's a large part of what our brains do, is just constantly create a predictive model of what's going on, and then get some data, update our predictive model to make it more accurate. And then match that against what we would like, what our goals are, and translate those into decisions about what to do. And, we register surprise in sort of exactly that way. When something fails to meet our predictive model, some new piece of data comes in that suddenly there's something that really doesn't fit in this environment. There's maybe a bear, in an environment that we don't expect there to be one. We get very surprised, and then we try to make sense of that, and we notice, oh, that's not actually a bear, that's actually a bush that just has the shape of a bear, and so on. Or it's actually a bear, and we're extra surprised, and we suddenly have to take action. So this is a sort of process that's running in a human mind constantly, and we're very good at it. We've evolved over billions of years, well, millions for humans, but billions for life, to be able to do this sort of thing. But we're always frustrated because we can't do it quite well enough. Especially when we're making long-term decisions and those decisions are hard. So we can ask, what could we do, as a group or as a society, or leveraging technologies that haven't existed in evolutionary history, to do a better job of that, to make better decisions through making better predictions. Mm-hmm. So this is what I started to think about when we were starting the Future of Life Institute. What would it look like to be able to have better predictions, say, of how artificial intelligence is going to unfold, or what are the most dangerous things that could happen in biotechnology, or where is a nuclear war most likely to start, and by what chain of events? You'd really like to know these things in order to make nudges now. And there's sort of a staple of science fiction. If you could travel in time, the great power that you have, obviously, is that you know how the future is going to turn out. And so you can go back and you think, well, if I just make this little nudge here, I can change something with a huge amount of leverage. And that's exactly the kind of leverage you would have if you could make great predictions. We usually just don't have it.
Yeah, like everyone would always go back and kill Hitler.
Right, that's the thing that pops into mind. But there are lots of other things that you might try with the benefit of hindsight. And we always so the question became, the future is hard to predict, but how hard exactly, and can we do better? And it seemed to me like, as with any skill, prediction is surely something that some people are better at than others. It's surely something that you can get better at. And it's surely something that when people work together at doing it and are sort of gathered in an effective way so that they can collaborate and they can sort of make a sort of community prediction, all of those things have got to be a better way of making predictions than just somebody sitting around, even if they're pretty good and have a model and so on. All of those have got to be better ways, picking people who are good at predictions, training them, and kind of getting them together. So that's sort of where the idea for this Metaculus effort was born. And as I started to do research, I realized that other people had thought of this at some level before. There were prediction markets, where you use a sort of market approach to try to get to sort of aggregate people's predictions about things by just seeing what they will pay for a given contract that pays out depending on what happens in the future. Yeah. And there were efforts to just get polls of people and say, okay, 50 people predict this thing, and let's average them together and see what we get. So there was this fairly detailed body of work showing that those things that I had wondered about were, in fact, true. You know, you can find people that are good at predicting, and it persists over time. You can train them, and people get better at predicting. And when you aggregate lots of predictions, you tend to get something that is better than, you know, almost all of the individual predictors, and reliably good.
Okay, so Metaculus is a program or a institution that does this?
It's really a web platform. You know, so it's a site that you can go to. The way it's set up at the moment, there's a whole list of questions that are just, some of them are important, interesting questions, like when are we going to have artificial general intelligence? Some of them are whose mind is in the red marble in Westworld? You know, there's a whole span of topics from kind of entertaining to quite serious, and all kinds of time spans from sort of a week to the longest term question we have currently is, will the universe end? So I have a hard time figuring out of a longer term question to make than that one, but I'll see.
Out of curiosity, is there what is the general consensus right now on whether the universe will end?
It's mixed. I think 70% last I checked were predicting that the universe would end.
Okay.
And there's a precise meaning of end that I concocted for this question, which is really about whether there are a finite or infinite number of computations that can be performed in the future light cone of Earth. Okay. Basically. So I think, you know, this, of course, is not a question that you're going to answer or get points for at any point, but it is one that's just fun to think about and discuss and so on. So there's the whole gamut from things that are happening now to just long-term discussion questions and everything in between.
So that sounds like a survey, though, and I think you said that Metaculus is a prediction market?
It's not quite a market. So the way a market works is for, say, will the Senate vote to keep net neutrality? That's a question that would just resolve yes. So in a prediction market, you would have a contract that says, I'll pay you $1 if the Senate votes to keep net neutrality, and I'll pay you nothing if it votes not to. Would you like, you know, what price will you pay for this contract? Mm-hmm. Right? And so if you're willing to pay 70 cents, that basically means you think there's a 70% probability that thing is going to happen. And then you can trade that contract back and forth and find a fair market price for it. And the presumption being that if markets are efficient and everybody is using their utmost to get the, you know, make the wisest purchase they can of these contracts, that price will settle on the best estimate of the probability of that event happening. So that's a prediction market, and it requires, you know, contracts, buyers and sellers, and at some level, some kind of currency that you're buying and selling these contracts with. And some prediction markets use fake currency, some use real currency. You know, there are new ones coming out with cryptocurrencies, or you can use Bitcoin in some. They have a slight disadvantage in the US that they're illegal.
That is a problem.
It's a slight problem. They're both illegal because the SEC considers them unregulated trading of securities. If these instruments that you're buying and selling are thought of as securities, and it runs afoul of online gambling laws because you really are getting paid depending on how something comes out. That could be a random thing.
Yeah.
So it falls afoul of both of those, and so the prediction markets that have real money have to be overseas, and it's a big pain for them.
Okay, and you didn't want to go overseas.
We didn't want to do that, and it's not clear to me that the prediction market is actually the best mechanism for the kinds of questions we're interested in. So I think.
Oh, why's that?
Well, markets have their strengths. Prediction markets, I think, have their strengths and weaknesses. I think they're going to be very strong where there's lots and lots of people interested in some high-profile question, like who's going to be president next. Mm-hmm. So you have lots of people who are interested and knowledgeable, and you have people who have a monetary interest and might want to say hedge against one new president or the other, or the outcome of the Supreme Court decision. Right? You may have a business that stands to lose a lot of money if X comes out of the Supreme Court. So you might want to leverage. You might want to hedge against that by using a prediction market to get a large amount of money out if that happens. Right? Just like any other hedge. So you can use it that way. But what's very difficult for a prediction market is if you've got a question like a small one, will Moore's law continue in this little bit, or will this patent accrue 17 citations or not, or will this scientific paper have some high impact? You're just not going to find a bunch of people who are willing to lay money on that and create a liquid market for it. What you might find are a few people with enough expertise to make a solid prediction about that thing. So a prediction market just doesn't have the liquidity in general to deal with these small questions that are sort of expert-based. It's also, I think, not clear to me what mechanism is the most accurate. I mean, there are two mindsets, I think, and one is a sort of economic mindset that says, if it's in people's financial interest, it sort of has to be the most accurate because otherwise you could game the system and gain lots of money. And that's true if it's a liquid market. Mm-hmm. There's another mindset, I think, and because I'm a scientist, I'm a research physicist, I tend to think of a collaborative venture where lots of people are trying to find the truth as a sort of collaborative venture where lots of people are trying to find the truth. that you want to design it sort of like our scientific process where there's some competition, but there's lots of cooperation as well. And there's an overall incentive where everybody wins if everybody gets it right. Mm-hmm. Right? Where a prediction market, there's always a winner and a loser. It's never in your interest to share information with other people, really, because you're just giving them an advantage that you might have.
But if you're buying up a lot of a certain outcome, then that itself is information that people take into account. If someone suddenly throws down $10,000 on...
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure, that's information. But what I mean is you can't give an argument. There's nothing to be gained by, except if you're gaming the system, by sharing your sort of deep knowledge of some situation with other people. What you always want to have a knowledge asymmetry in your favor in a prediction market.
But isn't that also true of well, I mean, obviously with the scientific method, people are motivated just for their desire for knowledge and for the truth. But if they weren't motivated by that, then they also have no incentive to share any information they may have. And so the money would give them that incentive.
Well, I think you can, the money flows in different ways. So in a scientific field, right, somebody decides we want answers to, we want valid, well backed up, well argued, testable answers to questions. And so we're going to put some money into effectively paying a whole bunch of people to figure out those answers. And so the incentives are aligned where the people want to work together at some level. There may be some competition because they want to get more of that pot of money than the other guys. But the basic incentive is to take the money, do research, share the research, work collaboratively with people, and sort of find the truth, at least when it's working well. And often it does. The finances behind a prediction market are a little bit different in that it's the people who are making the predictions are subsidizing the market.
Yeah.
Right. So they're betting against each other. It's sort of a zero-sum game, or maybe a negative-sum game if the market takes out some money, or a positive sum if the market decides to put some money in. But the fundamental dynamic is really more like gambling, whereas a scientific method, and this is what Metaculus is actually modeled after, the idea would be to have some set of resources. So if there were a bunch of money that were being spent on Metaculus, there isn't. But if there were, what it would be used for is to subsidize the whole thing and effectively to pay people to make predictions in the same way that scientists are paid to do research and find out truths about facts now. This would be payment for high quality predictors to work hard and find out truths about the future, or at least probable truths.
Okay. One last follow-up question before we get onto Metaculus then. And I will admit right up front that this is not my question. I was just reminded of it. Robin Hansen originally asked something along these lines, but seeing the way you just described the scientific process and how it differs from a prediction market, what would you think about using a prediction market to lay odds that a certain paper's result would be confirmed in follow-up testing, and deciding whether to publish in a paper based on that prediction market's results?
Yeah, I think that would be super interesting, but I think it would be super interesting whether it's a market or some other mechanism for predicting the success of a paper. So we do this all the time at some level. You know, when I write a paper, I don't write a paper that I think is going to be boring and have no impact. I don't like to write a paper that I think is going to turn out to be untrue or falsified or something that's super embarrassing.
Right.
And when I look at a paper, I think to myself, is this paper likely to be high impact and interesting and important? Then I might invest the time of hours or even days or weeks in some cases to read that paper and really understand it, or not. So that's a prediction that I have to make. And it would certainly be lovely if I were looking at a set of papers about, you know, esoteric physics questions, and there was a predicted probability of this being an interesting paper produced by a community of physicists. That would be super helpful, right? I could then look at the ones that were likely to be high impact, and of course there'd be all kinds of gaming and stuff that went on in that system if we were to devise it. But it would certainly be much more helpful to look at that set of papers with probabilities for them being great next to them than just a list of titles, which is what we have now. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, I think it would be great. I think there's another sense that, you know, Robin, and this is true of prediction markets in general, it's a mechanism for sort of putting your money where your mouth is. You know, when you ask somebody, well, what do you think is going to happen? And they say, well, this is going to happen, 99% sure. And then you ask them, okay, here's $1. Will you pay me $99 if it doesn't happen? Suddenly that $99, that 99% tends to, you know, come down a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's certainly true that betting is an interesting way to help people recalibrate their probabilities when they suddenly think about, well, what am I really that sure? And I think something similar could happen in prediction markets in general and for scientific ones if people were putting money on the line. So I think it might have some additional benefit there. But yes, I think there are lots of things where we should be using the power of well-calibrated aggregate predictions to sort of label things much more usefully than we do now, because we're doing it all the time anyway ourselves, just not very well.
Yeah. So how does Metaculus differ from a prediction market then?
So the way Metaculus works is it's essentially, so it's a list of questions. You go in, you see a question like, will SpaceX land people on Mars prior to 2030? That's one that I'm looking at right now. Mm-hmm. And you say, okay, what probability am I going to attribute to that? And you might think through, well, what are the different things that have to happen for SpaceX to do that and so on? What are the timetables? How long is it going to take? So you come up with a probability, you put it in, you can then come back and update that probability as time goes on. And then at some point, that event either occurs or not. 2030 is a little bit far off, but as I said, there are lots of shorter term questions. So then when the question comes out, either yes or no, you get points. So these are just sort of reputation points based on how accurate your prediction was. So if you predict 99% and it happens, you get lots of points. If you predict 1% and it happens, you lose very badly, so on. So this is a feedback system that sort of rewards and punishes you depending on how well you do and also how well calibrated you are. So you quickly learn not to give 1% probability to something unless you're really quite sure it's not going to happen and so forth. Now then what happens is after a while you start to accrue a track record, right? Each predictor starts to accrue a track record. Mm-hmm. And so when we have this question about SpaceX landing on Mars, there are 1,120 predictions on that question. The median prediction for all those 1,120 people, at least of the fairly recent ones, is 83%. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now this is probably way too high. And the reason it's probably way too high is that a bunch of people who are real fans of SpaceX came and made predictions on this question and they really wanted to succeed. And I don't blame them, but 83% is probably really high. But if you look at the prediction that is based on people who have a strong predictive track record in the past, that have just gotten lots of questions right in the past, the prediction is 39%. I'll tell you now. So this is kind of secret information, but the listeners of this podcast can now go and they have the inside number, 39%, so much lower, right?
So on the back end, there's a weighting of the, I guess, the predictions based on what your track record was in the past.
Exactly. So it actually does two things at the moment. One is just weighting on how accurate people were in the past, and the other is recalibrating people based on how each individual will build up a record of the questions that I said 70% likelihood for, what fraction of them actually happened. Most people at the high end are overconfident, meaning that most people, when they say something is, say, 95% likely, it's actually more like 80 or 85% likely to happen. But once you have enough statistics, you can then adjust for this. So when I plug in my prediction of, say, 70% to Metaculus at this point, it immediately knows that what I really mean is 60% or something like that. And it does that for everybody who's got a track record. Huh. And then it takes those recalibrated numbers and weights them by how well people do, and then produces this aggregate prediction.
And the recalibration is unique to each person based on their track record?
That's right.
Neat.
Yeah. Now, it's sort of tricky because if you, there's a little bit of a tension in that if you're continually doing Metaculus and taking it seriously and getting better and sort of trying to fix your own calibration, then Metaculus may over-recalibrate you for a while or something like that. But eventually it should even out. So it's cool to see. It's interesting it's an interesting piece of self-knowledge that now when I make a prediction at Metaculus, I can watch it tell me what I actually mean. Yeah. It's a little bit sobering when I think, no, I really do mean that's 50% likely, and it says no, 40.
Awesome. Huh. This is kind of neat because as rationalists, often we talk about prediction games and how to recalibrate ourselves, and it takes a bit of effort, and Metaculus almost sounds like it would help track that stuff for you. Can you look up your own record?
You can. So you can. It keeps a record of all your predictions as well as the aggregate predictions for the whole platform, and you can just look, and it gives you a little calibration plot that you can see what your calibration is based on the questions that you've answered.
And it would give you breakdowns like of the ones that I guessed 70%, actually 62% of them were correct.
That's right.
Neat.
Yeah. So what I've found, so now we've been doing this for a couple years, and so we have enough sort of data and enough users, although we can always use lots more, to start to see statistics and things. And so a few things I would say have become clear. One is that essentially the things that I mentioned earlier, that some people really are good at this. There are people who just keep getting them right. And it's not clear that they do lots more work They're just better at it. And it's, and there are people that I know who are quite smart and really good at lots of things, but not particularly great at making well-calibrated predictions.
I think I would be in that camp.
This is just how it is. I'm decent, I've found, but not at all as good as some of the best people. Yeah. It's also clear that doing it trains you to think, in calibrated predictions. And so when people ask me now, do you think this is going to happen? Probability just pops into my head. I can't help it. I spent enough time on the system that I'll tell them, 73%, and they kind of laugh.
Oh, neat.
But I'm serious.
How much time do you spend on the system? Is it like an hour every day or more?
Probably less than that. And I actually don't take care to make predictions about everything, but I like to keep an eye on what's going on. I like to think of new questions to put up there because that's really fun. Keep an eye on what the community is doing, what the predictions are, and things that I care about. So like any user, except that I probably produce more questions and kind of keep an eye on things more than most users would.
Oh, can any user submit a question?
They can, yeah. So if someone has a nice, well-formed question that they submit, it will probably just go live. If it's kind of just an idea or a kind of mess of a question, we'll try to find someone who will, a moderator who will whip it into shape. One of the things that becomes clear after writing and editing questions is it's quite hard to write precise questions that really will, turn out to be true or false. You've got to make them precise enough. You've got to have a data source, to compare to that is going to exist when the question resolves. You've got to think through what are the ways that things could go wrong or just different than we're thinking, such that this question wouldn't have a clear answer to it. And this happens all the time. You find, and so for example, we had a question of whether Trump would try to fire Mueller, right? And the period went by and Trump hadn't tried to fire Mueller. So it resolved no. But then it turns out that Trump had tried to fire Mueller, but then didn't succeed, right? He told, the legal counsel said he would quit if he tried to fire him. So does that count or not? So fortunately, the way we had written the question was such that it didn't really matter, but that was the kind of thing that happens all the time, that there's just some way that things can turn out that isn't either the yes or no that you specified in the question. So you get really good at specifying the question clearly enough that it's really going to be one or the other. And that in itself is a learning experience to sort of think through, well, what are all the ways that sort of things could pan out? And what it really teaches you that when somebody asks you, is this going to happen? Where there's like a default, there's a baseline, and then there's this, which is something different from the baseline. The answer to that question is probably not.
Okay.
Whatever that thing is, because it's almost always less likely than you think it's going to be. Oh. There's almost always the thing that you've called sort of the positive outcome almost always has various ways to go wrong. If you ask, will SpaceX land people on Mars prior to 2030? There are just so many things that can go wrong in that. SpaceX can go out of business. It can end up happening in 2031. SpaceX turns into another company.
The government could say it's too risky to let humans go off the planet.
Yes. The SpaceX launches the mission and they're on their way and the humans die because they're in space with radiation that they didn't, So there's so many ways that something like that can go wrong. So thinking through those is a really useful exercise to do, and you get better and better at that with practice, I would say.
So how does anything ever happen?
Well, something's always got to happen. But when you name the thing beforehand, then you often forget all the different ways that it cannot happen. It's really Murphy's Law, right? Okay. There are lots and lots of ways that the world could be. You pick a tiny number of them and say, this is the way I would like it to be. or this is the way I think it's going to be. And then you shouldn't be too surprised when that goes awry because you picked a tiny fraction of the things that could happen. And it's a testament to our capability as predictive and effective agents that anything good happens at all, right? Because the world is just working against you all the time. The phase space of the universe is just immense, and if you just meander around, you're going to make a mess. So it's a lot of effort to make things happen the way you want them to happen and to happen favorably. And, that's what we're about. That's what we've spent millions of years evolving in order to do, and thousands of years evolving society and technology in order to do, is to fight against Murphy's Law in some sense. And so that's sort of what the idea is here too, that as we understand what are the different pathways forward, how do we avoid that huge phase space of unfavorable possibilities and hone in on the good ones?
God, that sounds very noble to me. I like to think of myself as an agent for anti-chaos in the universe.
Oh, you totally are. I mean, that's what living systems are in general.
Yeah.
We work very hard to prevent entropy from increasing in our local environments in a major way, or at least in our bodies. And we work very hard to pick goals that we have for reasons that are, known and decided by us, and make those happen. It's quite amazing that we can.
So I have two questions about Metaculus then. I guess the first one would be, what do you do with all this data that you get? Like, what is the point of knowing that there's a 37% chance that or people think there's a 37% chance that we'll land people on Mars?
Yeah, I would say there are three real purposes. One is to provide the sort of training that you get when you use it. So it's sort of, it's sort of like an educational exercise that people who use the site for a long time just get better at doing this. And so it's a sort of training system for getting people better at making accurate, well-calibrated predictions and thinking clearly about future events. So I think that's one positive thing that comes out of it. I think a second thing is that it is a way to figure out which people are really good at making predictions, right? So we now have lots of people with a real unimpeachable track record, positive or negative, about how they do at predicting things. And this is not something you can fake, right? There's no, you can have all the degrees you want, but if your points are negative, you're not good at predicting stuff. So it's an amazingly clean sort of reputation system or sort of authority granting system for people who are just good at what they do. And when you think about it, making predictions is at some level a very basic source of why we believe or trust some people and not others, right? Why do you think science, say physics or electrical engineering or biochemistry, is given the accord in society that it is? It's because the iPhone works. The electromagnetic waves carry the signal from one place to another. The rules that are created in those fields are rules that are basically for making predictions about what some physical system will do. And those enterprises have reputation because those predictions work. And I think it's similar in, if you ask two experts, well, what do you think is good? What do you think is the better way to do this, or what do you think happened in this circumstance, or what do you think is the better choice for what policy to use? They're going to give you different arguments, and they're both going to sound pretty convincing. But if one of them really has a track record of actually getting things right in the past, that's going to weigh tremendously, right? So if you've got someone who has, done many different ventures, say they're business ventures or some other sort of ventures, and been successful at them, and another person who just hasn't, they've kind of failed over and over again, and you ask each of them to make a prediction about something, who are you going to listen to? You're going to listen to the one who succeeded over and over again, because they effectively, predict the future, and you have a degree of trust in them. So I think there's a huge utility in having a system that can generate a a real grounding of trust in particular people or groups of people or processes that make accurate predictions again and again. And so that's part of the goal, is to say, okay, we've got this system that you can rely on. Here's why you can rely on it, because it's done this in the past. Here's how well you can rely on it, right? You can look at questions that are like this, that have been given an 80% chance of happening, say, and see that in the past, 80% of those things have happened, right? Whereas if you just go to some expert at a consulting firm and they, run the numbers and tell you 80%, what are you going to do with that number exactly? Do you trust that 80%? I don't know. I would want to, if I were to trust an 80% number from someone, say, well, what is that based on? What's your model? What's the ensemble that is 80% of what, and so on? So I think that's the second goal, is to really identify who are the really good predictors and create a sort of reputation system for the predictors and for the platform and the aggregate prediction as a whole, that can provide a source of kind of authority and sort of trusted insights into things. And then I'd say the third goal is just to actually generate predictions about things. So to see, for example, for artificial intelligence, what sorts of time frames should we really be thinking about for different levels of capability, for robotics? What probability should we be thinking about in terms of autonomous weapons or artificial general intelligence, or passing the Turing test, or artificially generated fake news? There are all kinds of things that are coming, right? And we don't know when exactly. Nobody knows when. Mm-hmm. But the question is, what is the best level of estimate that we can get? And I think knowing to the degree that we can have confidence in answers about those questions, you can really take action based on that. So if I feel like there's a 20% chance that artificial general intelligence is coming within 5 years, that's a huge piece of information for me. If I think that chance is 0% or 0.001%, then that's a different piece of information that really would affect what I, as with my hat of the Future of Life Institute, who worries about this, would do, right?
Now, to enable for this to become useful, it does have to have the trust of the, greater community. And it seems to gain that trust, you need to do something very public correctly. Like I think, what was it? Nate Silver from 528 made a almost 100, or was it 100% spot on prediction, which is what got him all the attention and people started listening to him. I don't remember what the prediction was now. It was one of the presidential races where he called every state. Is there any effort yet to do something large and showy like that to demonstrate the power of Metaculus?
It's a good question. I'm of two minds about it in that at some level I think it should be and has to be the aggregate track record that you really look at to trust. Otherwise, so there, one can imagine, one doesn't have to imagine because it actually happens, but one can imagine someone who makes predictions regularly and they make very bold predictions, right? Mm-hmm. But somewhat quietly. And then when they get them right, they file them all in a big file. And then after a couple of years, they have this huge file of amazing, bold, correct predictions, right? Because they've just cherry-picked the ones that came out right. And that's something you can certainly do, and it looks very impressive, but carries zero information or utility. So I'm a little bit worried about looking for a big bang, here's our bold prediction about things, and this is why you should listen to us, because I don't think that's really the right metric. I think the right metric is that you actually, over time, get it right lots of times, right? And you get it right in the right amount of times. You get 90% of the things right that you say 90% to, and you get 50% right of the things that you say 50% to. And as you get better, you might have more and more things that you say 10% or 90% to. That level of precision is very useful. But I'm a little bit leery of kind of making big, bold predictions that are contrary to what everybody thinks and getting them right, because you won't do that very often, and you'll just be cherry picking.
But even if you were going with the more aggregate over time method, you still need some way to publicize, look, these are our predictions, and this is our track record, and it's really good, and it's continuing to be good. It seems like, you need to get people to know. That's
absolutely true, and that's something we need to figure out how to do well. The hard part at some level is that the right way to assess track records using Breyer scores or calibration plots or whatever, most people's eyes glaze over. There's a particular small set of people, perhaps some of the audience of this podcast, who really like those things, right? Are gonna be like, "What's your Breyer score? That's exciting." But the general public is not gonna know what a Breyer score is or care when you explain it. So you have to, we will need to come up with metrics that convey that information in a way that's more understandable and impressive, or immediately sort of imbibable in some way that doesn't require the level of care and finesse that the real track record does. So anybody can look at the actual track record of Metaculus. It's all public, which is something you also won't find almost anywhere else, right? Just all the public predictions that something makes. People don't do that exactly for the reason, because it's embarrassing when you get it wrong. But
I know a few people that do it, but in general you don't.
Yeah. So and those people are certainly to be commended, and it's a great example. And we very much want to follow that and encourage it, because it's interesting when you first start to make predictions. It's very uncomfortable in a way, right? You're really putting yourself on the line. You dial to 90%, and you're feeling like, really, I don't really know this. I don't have expertise in this. What do I know? How can I put 90%? And then if you get it wrong, it's kind of embarrassing. But once you get over that, and you feel like, okay, I'm just going to make predictions and see how they come out. And if I get them wrong, I get them wrong, but I'm learning. So once you sort of do it enough to attain a good attitude about it, then you can really make progress and just feel self-honest. You can just own up to where you screwed up, and feel good about the ones that you got right. And it's been really nice to see the caliber of the users of Metaculus really getting to that point where people will just say, like, boy, I really screwed that one up. I gave that 1% and it totally happened, and so on. There's just a feeling of honesty about it that is a little bit all too rare, in current online settings or in culture in general.
Yeah. So what do the users get out of Metaculus? I mean, obviously the training with calibration, and it sounds like it's fun, but without the money incentive, are you worried about missing a certain amount of people, or is there something else that draws them in?
I am. So we actually did a survey recently to ask, what it is that people use the platform for, like what's important to them. And it was those things. People liked just seeing interesting, fun questions and thinking about them. That was probably the top thing, actually. People liked getting to be a better predictor. They liked finding out what other people and the platform as a whole predicted about things. So having a kind of inside knowledge of what's going to happen better than other people have. And we asked about money, and most people rated that relatively low. Now, that may be because we haven't given anybody any money so far, other than one, we ran one contest where the prize was 1 ether. So we basically haven't given any money. So the people who are still around are kind of not the ones who are super money motivated. But there are a fair number of people who will do it without that motivation. I think it would be really interesting to see what would change and how many people what would happen if we did start supplying money. So that's certainly something that we're thinking about, whether it be prizes or ultimately we would like, as I sort of alluded to earlier, to create a system where if you're someone, say you're a company, and you really want to know how is this Supreme Court decision going to come out, or how on time is the next Tesla model going to be, or how successful is this medical trial going to be, if that's really important information to you and you would like to have a quantitative assessment of it, that this is a place where you could go and you could plunk down some money and say, I really want to know the answer to this, and I'm willing to pay X dollars to get a really good answer to this. And then that money can be offered to high quality predictors who have accrued a good track record on questions like that, to incentivize them to spend time and effort thinking about that particular question and making a good prediction about it. So that's really the platform that I would like to see eventually happen, where people who need predictions can, if they have the means, pay for really good predictions, and people who are really good at making predictions and have accrued that track record can be paid for doing that. And I think that's a system that could work in principle.
How would a calibration estimate work with that? Because if someone gives, say, 70% chance that something will happen, I mean, either it does or it doesn't. So what is their incentive to say 70% as opposed to 90% if there's, it's a one-off question?
So they would not be paid depending on how the question turns out in this model, because that would be gambling. So that's like a prediction market. What they would be paid for is the fact that they've accrued lots of expertise and that they're making a prediction on this question. So it would be kind of like a micro consultancy,
okay,
right? Where you say, I want to hire a consultant to make a prediction about this question for me. I would like a consultant, please, who has done really well at predicting things like this in the past. Here's the money, and they will give me their prediction. But the money doesn't depend on whether they get it right or not.
Okay.
But they care about getting it right because they want to keep their good reputation. They want to keep their points. They want to keep getting consultant contracts in the future effectively.
Yeah.
So they need to keep their track record accurate.
Okay, so that's what you briefly mentioned at the beginning, that if you had more money coming in, that this is the sort of thing that you would do with it.
Yeah, that's how I see it ultimately being a sort of self-sustaining effort that could grow big, if it could be supported in that way. I don't have a big interest in having lots of people and running ads and things like that to keep this going. So I think it would have to be at some level that people feel like it's valuable to have predictions in general or particular predictions, and that subsidizes the effort as a whole.
How's it supported right now? Is it just work on your part?
Well, it's a lot of just time donated essentially. We have raised some money, and we sort of have some small contracts that are essentially with nonprofits to do, it's unlevel philanthropic, right? Places that would like to know answers to things, but also would just like to support the general effort. But it's a little bit on a shoestring, and we've been thinking about, do we want to make a serious effort to raise, venture funds for it or something like that, which we probably should do. But it's a lot more fun to just come up with cool questions and technologies.
You said this was originally for the Future of Life Institute to help you make decisions. Have you used it yet for any decision making?
A little bit here and there. So it definitely is informing, I think, my views in terms of artificial intelligence, in terms of biotechnology. We ran a little question thinking about we were thinking about where our next conference would be, and we were debating Puerto Rico. We did a conference in Puerto Rico. The second time, Puerto Rico was in this major Zika issue, and so we ran some questions about how widespread Zika would be in Puerto Rico and things like that sort of helped inform those decisions. So I think a little bit, but I think it still has a ways to go. There are capabilities I think that we need to build, and we just need to have lots more people do it, so that the whole effort is bigger, more questions, more connections between questions. So one of the things that I think is going to be most interesting and is sort of on the docket very soon is to create connections between questions. So to say, given that the BFR gets tested, this is the next big rocket that Elon Musk wants to make in space. Given that the BFR gets tested by 2020, will SpaceX land people on Mars prior to 2030? Right. So clearly, the probability will be higher if the BFR gets tested early than it will be if it doesn't get tested early. So you can make answers to some things contingent on answers to other things. And once you create enough connections like that between questions, then you can create a whole network, a Bayes network or a fault tree or an event tree. And these probability structures that tie together the different questions in various interesting ways. And I think once we have that sort of technology and the ability to kind of dissect big questions into lots of little ones, then things are going to get even more interesting, right? So you can ask things like, so when you ask something like, will there be a nuclear event, that is not a test that happens by 2020, right?
Yeah.
That's a question I would like to know the answer to. I'd like to know whether that's 1% or 10%, or 0.1%. But it's a lot of effort to figure out the answer to that question, because you've got to think through what are all the different ways that could happen. Right now you immediately start thinking of North Korea, but of course there could be Iran, there could be accidents. There's all kinds of other things that could happen. You've got to think through each one and kind of dissect that question into the different ways that a nuclear explosion could happen. For each one, what would have to happen? For each one of those things that has to happen, what would have to happen? And so you can build a whole tree, and this is something that's done, in risk analysis. But having a system that can crowdsource building that tree and crowdsource putting the probabilities into all the nodes in that tree and the connections between them will make something I think that's really, really powerful and that just doesn't exist right now. Other than maybe if you've got, Rand or something planning nuclear wars, you've got something like this going on, but maybe even then you don't. I think that will be a new thing that will really start to inform decisions, because then you can also think, okay, well, if I tweak this thing at the bottom of the tree, how does that affect the things up the tree, right? So you can look for leverage points in there. If you want to decrease the chance of a nuclear missile, where are the things that if you dialed them down or dialed them up would have the biggest effect on that?
Oh.
Right? When you understand that whole network, then you can start to look for those things, and those are your leverage points.
Yeah, I do always get a bit worried whenever I hear the term crowdsource, because crowdsourcing seems to always depend a lot on the enthusiasm of people for a project, and that tends to wane over years. Do you think this is going to be hard to scale up to a large amount of people and for a long period of time?
It may. I guess we'll see. I mean, I think I don't like the term crowdsource either, because I prefer aggregation of expert or something like that, because I think it's at some level part of the whole point is to identify the people who are really good and kind of neglect the rest of the crowd, even if they don't know they're being neglected. To keep them from everybody, but to hone in on who are the people who actually know what they're doing and to combine them in some, careful algorithmic way. So I've struggled a bit with what is the right name for what this thing is doing, because it's not a prediction market. I don't like crowdsourced predictions because it just sounds like a bunch of people, milling around a bowl of jelly beans and guessing different numbers and averaging them together, which works, by the way, but that's not exactly what we want to do. Prediction engine maybe, or prediction aggregation platform.
So the function of the function of the masses then would be mainly to keep making predictions, so you could find the ones that are the people that are really good at this and mainly focus on them. And I guess that would be the purpose of like anyone who joins in this is to try to become one of those people that's really good at predicting, so you could make the consultation fees. Yes, and I think obviously if you have a crowd of experts, that's actually quite powerful. Yeah. Right? Just a random crowd is not so great, but if you have a crowd of experts that are organized in some way, you can get a whole lot done. So if you get a big enough crowd, then even 1% of the sort of most effective 1% of that crowd can still be a crowd, and then you've really got something. So, and it's also true that the more people are doing it, the more people just benefit from both the fun and the training, right? I think if more people in society could literally just sort of understand what probability was, let alone be able to, assign accurate, well-calibrated probabilities to things. Yeah. Boy, that would change things, right? Yeah. So, I mean, if I could force just everybody in government to spend, 50 hours on Metaculus, I think
boy, would the world be different.
Oh man, I was just a month, 2 months ago, I was speaking with an English professor, and this particular English professor is very big into astrology, I guess. And we were talking about, well, the prison statistics came up, and she was like, yeah, they absolutely guarantee you 99% sure that this percentage of the prisoners are going to be like this sign, right? I said, okay, how much are you willing to bet on that? And she was like, $20. I was like, are you kidding me? 99% sure and you're willing to bet 20 freaking bucks? That's not 99%.
Yeah. Yeah. So it, I think
this is a thing that would be good for the rest of the population to actually think about.
And we make decisions all the time, right? That simply don't make sense if you just have even the barest grasp of the probabilities and the numbers and how to multiply one by the other. Mm-hmm. And sometimes there are reasons we make decisions as a society that, we knowingly disregard the numbers at some level. We spend vast amounts of money preventing a relatively small number of terrorist attacks versus, car accidents. And this is something we choose to do. I think, at some level, people understand that they're much more likely to die in a car accident than a terrorist attack. But one of them is so much worse in their mind than the other that they just attribute a lot more importance to it. Or they, some people just don't know that. So that happens also. Or we decide, we have human feelings that say when someone is deliberately attacking us, that's something that is just more important to meet and prevent than something that is accidental.
Yeah.
You're dead in each case. So we have lots of things that come into making decisions, but even when you sort of agree on this is, cause A of accidental death and this is cause B of accidental death, they're both equally horrifying. And it's obvious that this amount of dollars would be vastly more effective in this side than this side. We still don't do it, right? Because it's just not the way that we tend to make decisions, because people aren't thinking that way as much as they should. So
you said that, yes. So far, I've heard the questions mentioned technical advancements and political events and entertainment, popular entertainment. Are there any subjects that are not on the table, or is this like free for anything that anyone wants to ask?
In principle, it's free for anything. We focus mostly on sort of science and technology things because, and a little bit on geopolitics and politics, but partly because that's our relative advantage. The founders are pretty much all like physicists and scientists. Mm-hmm. And the connection with Future of Life Institute and the sort of effective altruism community is thinking primarily about technologies and a little bit geopolitics and things like that. There are also things like sports, where both, where it's not our relative advantage, and there are plenty of solutions out there. If you want to bet on sports, there are lots of people who will take your money and give you odds and all those things.
Yeah.
So there's no point in competing with that. There's probably not much of a point in competing on the front of who's going to win the presidency in 2020, because there's a whole system of Nate Silvers and many others mm-hmm. doing polls and aggregating them well and all that stuff. And if you put a question up on Metaculus about that, the smart people will just cut and paste from 538.com into Metaculus, and that's like the right thing to do. Yeah. So I see the relative advantage being more technical, more obscure things where there's just a higher level of kind of depth of understanding that's necessary to really make good predictions about it. So that tends to be where we focus, and just also on the stuff that we think is cool and fun, and timely. We had a series of questions on cryptocurrencies, right? So that's another one, technical side. I'm looking at one on whether nuclear fusion will first be developed in China. So I would love to get an arms race started in nuclear fusion between the Chinese and the Americans. So there are some things where I really don't want to see arms races or just races. But if we could get China and the U.S. competing to develop nuclear fusion first, I'd be a happy camper. I don't unfortunately think Metaculus quite has the reach to encourage that at the moment.
Yeah. What would you think of an academic department using this sort of tool, or let's say Metaculus specifically, weighted for just the best predictors, using that to make their decisions on which people to hire based on the estimate of their future publications records?
Yeah. So I think at some level, this is what, hiring committees are doing anyway, again, individually and imperfectly in their mind. There might be some better way to do it. I think a first step could possibly be just causing people to more consciously and sort of quantitatively think about some of these questions. So for example, one of the things that I'm involved with is giving grants to people through a couple of different organizations I'm involved with, where we have money from somewhere and want to give it out as research grants to some group of people. So we'll generally have a panel that comes in and reads all the proposals and then makes decisions based on their relative merits of how we're going to allocate this pot of money. So the Future of Life Institute, for example, is doing this right now with proposals on artificial intelligence safety. And in one of these panels, the last time that I did one, this was not for Future of Life, but another organization, I asked the reviewers to explicitly write, okay, what are 3 things that this proposal is trying to accomplish? What is the probability of them succeeding? For each one of these things, what is the probability of them succeeding? And what would the impact in the field be if they were to succeed on kind of a logarithmic scale from negligible to earth-shattering, right? 1 to 10 maybe. And we then kind of ran the numbers, and we didn't actually use those numbers to make decisions, but we kind of displayed them next to the sort of decisions that they had come to separately. And it was interesting to see that sometimes those were very much in accord, and sometimes they were quite different. So people were clearly making decisions on grants that were rather at odds with their assessment of probabilities times impacts, right? Even though, our stated criterion was we want to maximize the expectation value of impact per dollar, right? That's kind of what we said we want to do in the effective altruism or just effective anything spirit. And nonetheless, decisions were sometimes quite at odds with that. And I'm not sure that I would want a system that just put all the numbers in and then gave out the money according to an algorithm. But I think it's very instructive to have people explicitly think about those things and to then look back at what they explicitly said and what other people explicitly said about that in comparison to the decision that they're actually making. So I'm not sure that I'd be in favor of just pumping every faculty member's numbers into an algorithm and it says you hire this person. Maybe that would be an okay system, but I think it would be too big of a jump from what we have now, even if it were a good idea. But I do think a little bit more explicit thinking, what is it that we're actually trying to hire? Is there a way to quantify that in some way? And if there is, or to the extent that there is, let's make predictions about what those quantities are going to be, would be an interesting exercise. And I think what it would probably actually lead to is the realization that you don't quite know how to quantify what you're trying to hire. We don't just really want to hire the person who publishes the most papers. That can be lots of crappy papers. We don't necessarily want to just hire the person who has the most citations, because then that might just be in a field where every paper happens to have much more citations than in some other field, which is also a super interesting and important field, but there are just fewer people working in it and fewer citations per paper on average, right? So you have to think carefully about what you're trying to incentivize, and do you care about teaching? Do you care about bringing in money to the university? So they're all different things that faculty are responsible for and get hired to do. If you were to come up with a sort of quantitative way of assessing all those things, which doesn't exist, I can tell you, from being, hiring and promoting and being promoted in lots of ways in different academic settings. If you were to come up with that, then you could start making predictions about it. But I think what you would find is that as is generally the case, you'd have a hard time writing down what it was you were trying to predict. And once you set that metric, of course, people would start gaming to satisfy that metric rather than some other thing that you really have in mind, which is just generally being an awesome researcher and teacher and everything else.
Okay. So what is the future for Metaculus?
Well, it's an interesting question. There's apparently a 5% chance that we'll do an initial coin offering.
Oh, neat.
We put a question up about that. So it's 5%. Yeah. We haven't dared to put a question. There is a high chance that Metaculus will still exist in 2030 or something. Oh. We recently had a question about that. So its future is bright in terms of length. I think, more seriously, I think as I said, we need to actually bring in some real resources to it. So either raise some venture funding or do a coin offering or something, or some means get enough resources in to really expand the effort into something that will have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of users rather than thousands. But I think we're sort of ready to do that. The platform is mature. The technology is there. There's a couple more major pieces that I think we need to put in. But I think at some level, we just now want to grow in terms of how many people are making questions, how many people are answering questions, the range and specificity of questions, and so on. I think it's pretty much ready to scale. And I think that it will, I'm pretty optimistic because I think society is really thirsting at some level for any source of, authority that it can actually rely on, or at least some segments. There's certainly some segments of society that just want to undermine everything. But I think there's a real need for actual quality information that you feel like you have a reason to trust. And I think that need will only grow. And I think as more people see that need and as more technologies, machine learning and things get built into this, there are lots of ways that I can see this idea expanding into some actually quite important and major force for making better decisions in society as a whole, a general purpose thing. If I'm super ambitious, like, Wikipedia or something like that, where it's genuinely of huge utility to lots of people, takes a lot of effort to keep it going. Some money, but not a huge amount of money, but is just vastly useful to a large number of people in doing things well. And if we can make something that serves any fraction of that amount of utility and good, I'll be super excited.
Nice. Well, I think we're getting close to the end. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention that maybe I haven't asked about?
No, I think we've covered a lot of ground.
I do have a question from Robin because I have his email and I just asked him, is there, anything you'd like to ask? And two of my questions came from that, but one that I don't think really directly impacts Metaculus. Sorry, doesn't directly impact Metaculus at all, but it feels like I should ask in thanks to him. Do you support legalizing real money markets?
Do I support legalizing real money prediction markets?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if I would support, that's an interesting question because I've never actually thought about being in the deciding role in that. Yeah, I think I would support it. I would like to see prediction markets that were actual markets in the same sense as current commodities futures markets, say, where there are actually regulations that protect people in various ways, and make it kind of a clean financial system. So one thing that worries me a bit is, when I see cryptocurrency trading markets or think about upcoming futures markets or prediction markets, there's a lot of shenanigans that happen in financial markets because when people are incentivized to just make money and there's a set of rules, they will push those rules in every way that they can, right? So all of the things that have happened in equities trading over decades, all kinds of shenanigans from all kinds of games that are played, insider information games, high frequency trading, pump and dump games. There's all kinds of stuff that people have come up with. And we've slowly but surely built up systems so that we feel like there's a fairly well tended, just system for trading in the world equity markets and futures markets. And I think that's a great thing and has done a lot of good economically. And I'm a little bit worried that building sort of shadow markets that don't have any of those features and are basically built to kind of avoid those sorts of institutions is going to have all those things happen again. So I like prediction markets for certain things. I'm a little bit worried about prediction markets that are being generated, on the blockchain and so on, specifically to avoid people kind of looking too careful or regulating what's actually happening in the trading platforms.
Okay.
So yes and no. So I I would like to have them. I think it would be great if there were more prediction markets. I do think though that we have to be careful about how it's done. Otherwise, they're just going to turn into kind of gambling systems where lots of people are going to lose lots of money.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for joining us, and keep us updated if you do go the whole venture capital fund or this launches in some other major new direction.
Will do. Yeah, and I'll look forward to hearing some more interesting podcasts from you guys as well in the future.
Oh, great. And before we go, is it metaculus.com?
Yes.
Okay. For the listeners, that's metaculus.com, and we'll have links, of course, in the post. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. Here's Steven's excuse for why he wasn't here. Exclusive only for Patreon supporters.
I think it's a good excuse.
Yeah. Should we jump in?
All right, let's do it.
Okay. Oh, and before we forget, also got to thank Kyle, sound engineer.
I did the finger guns. You couldn't see him.
He's puts up with a lot of tight deadlines from us sometimes.
Especially the last couple months have been pretty hectic, so Kyle's been kicking tons of ass for us, and it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, this one's about to go to him with a 4-day turnaround, so not a lot of time.
Thank you, Kyle. Sorry. But we'll get back on track. I'll be moved in next week, and then things will settle down. So
yeah. Should we go on to the listener feedback?
I'm down. Let's do it.
On the Getting Schooled episode, Not Without Incident says, I think education is a really important topic, but I worry that some of the criticisms of education were based on an overgeneralization of personal experience. The idea that high school is a miserable time for everyone and would be so much happier in apprenticeships is wrong on two fronts. First, lots of people love high school. The nicest way to put this is that most people in the rationalist community aren't the type of person who has the best time in high school. Second, adolescents can be pretty miserable in a lot of ways, and that's not high school's fault. Romeo and Juliet weren't in high school, but it didn't go great for them.
They were idiots.
Yes, they were.
But I love him. But the rest of that point stands.
Yeah, it's ridiculous the way humanity has made it into like the greatest romantic love story, when it was really a story about two teenagers being idiots. Like, don't be like these guys.
Yeah, they didn't have it figured out. I think a lot of that's true, but I'm wondering if it's school's fault that adolescence sucks, because a large part of why the not being at school part was pretty good for large parts of it for many people, right? Mm-hmm. It was being there surrounded by bullies and dicks and stupid requirements and homework and teachers that made everything suck.
And just being trapped and bored for hours on end sometimes. Yeah. That's pretty damn horrible too.
And I'm at this place now with my professional life where I'm surrounded by people who are way smarter than I am. Mm-hmm. I've never been a genius, but I was really bored in school. My cousin's going through the same thing. She's 17 and she's she, especially earlier, she had disciplinary problems because she'd get bored and goof off, and that distracts the kids who are learning at their full learning speed. But she's finished and bored, a third of the way through the class. So I mean, there's not an obvious way to fix that. That's not crazy expensive and, really hard to implement. So
I think
like it can be school's fault, but not like to the site where we blame the schools. It's just like, yes, you guys are, it's happening because of this, but it's not like you're to blame, right?
Yeah. I just think more than anything else, schools shouldn't be mandatory. It shouldn't be basically the prison that is being made. If you didn't have to go to school, it'd probably be a lot better.
I wonder about that. Like, I might have quit because I got bored. Like, I guess it depends on how much cultural pressure there still was. Like, I knew kids who dropped out. It's not mandatory. Like, no one goes to prison. You can not graduate.
What happens when you don't go to school? Because don't you actually get in trouble some way? I mean, I guess you wouldn't go to prison, obviously, but
I'm trying to think of the people that I knew. One left for like a year and then did like some bullshit homeschooling program that was all like legit. How old is the Earth? 7,000 years old stuff.
Shit.
It was insane. He showed me his schoolwork. Like, but apparently it was the cheapest online one that they could do, and it was just to get him some certification, high school diploma. But obviously not in education. And then the other guy, we had a bit of a falling out. They actually had the same name. I think he eventually got some sort of a certification, like a GED or something. But I just remember he stopped going after junior year of high school. And I mean, his parents didn't care, so they didn't what's the non-legal equivalent of press charges, like make him go.
Right.
But I can tell you that it didn't work out great for that guy, but he was also the kind of guy who didn't want to go to school. So it's hard to say. That's a really small sample size.
I was pretty sure that if your kids don't go to school, the parents are punished in some way. Fines or something.
We'll have to look into that. I don't know if that's true because, I mean, we've got homeless kids.
Yeah.
So I
the
can't
system
imagine.
is pretty stupid.
It sounds perfectly plausible that the system's that stupid, but I don't know if that's true. If anyone knows the laws in the U.S. about that and wants to educate us because we're too lazy to Google it, that'd be interesting.
We can always Google it afterwards.
While Enosh is Googling, actually, I'm going to read a comment that Eddie wrote into Bayesian Conspiracy Podcast at gmail.com and said, "Wonderful episode. Audrey is great and passionate and reminiscent of my favorite teachers and friends who went into education. I found myself agreeing with basically everything that she said."
Oh,
so you can pass it on to Audrey.
Cool.
And then they pointed out that the mistake between CDC and FDA and stuff. But I just liked the positive feedback. Apparently, other people had good experiences. I mentioned in high school I had great teachers.
Yeah, well, I mean, I loved the learning part of high school. I also had really good teachers in most subjects, and in others I didn't. But the ones where I had good teachers were amazing. It was all the stuff outside of class that was awful.
Maybe I'm having two biases to think about there. One was that my high school experience was so much better than my junior high school experience.
Mm-hmm.
So like looking back, it was a lot better than junior high, but it was not, I wasn't happy. But I think I'm comparing those two schooling periods. But also I remember like being constantly full of anxiety and like to the point like where my stomach is upset all the time. I'm sort of just remembering that right now. You're right. Apparently a lot of high school sucked, but I had good teachers. So, I had several good teachers anyway. Some of them sucked too, but that's just how it goes.
Yeah. Apparently, yes, your parents can go to jail.
Whoa.
Yeah. Wow. In California, parents are found guilty of a misdemeanor and can be fined up to $2,000, sent to jail for a year, or both.
Okay. So California is also the state, I think, where if your kid walks to the park unattended, you can be fined for negligence and as a bad parent.
But it looks like in just about every state, you can, get a fine if you don't go to school. And if you get enough fines that you don't pay, they generally come and take you to jail.
Well, that surprises me sort of. Like I said, I sort of guessed that it could be that crazy, but I'm bummed to hear that it is. I mean, who put this through thinking, what'll show them? It'll show those kids who aren't going to school not having parents. That'll teach them their lesson.
Yeah.
Then who's like what? Then they're just a ward of the state, and someone that works for the city is going to drive them to school. That's fucking ridiculous,
dude. That'd be a real dick way to get back at your parents if you're upset. Just don't go to school a lot until they get fined.
Did you ever see that episode of South Park where they threaten or they call Child Protective Services and all their parents?
Oh my god!
And say that they were like being molested, and then it's like Children of the Corn, where like the kids just run the town.
Cool.
And it was. Have you seen that one?
No.
Oh, it's ridiculous. I can't remember what the name of the episode is. It's one of the older ones. But it's there's like they break into like factioning tribes, and like the whole town is just children, and like this couple, their car breaks down and they're like trying to get it fixed, and it's just like Butters there and like his little overalls trying to work on it. It was Yeah, why doesn't that happen? That's all right. I'm clearly tired. That's hilarious, though. Hilarious and super disheartening.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Probably doesn't happen that often.
probably not. I don't know. I mean, the other thing too is like someone's gonna have to be willing to,
Take
someone in
your
the state is
parents
gonna
to jail.
yeah, and go all the way through with this. And at some point, they're like, "Fuck it." The parents don't care. The kid doesn't want to go. If he goes or he or she goes, they're gonna just make a mess anyway, and ruin that for everybody. So,
Right.
yeah, it's hard to see whose interest that serves. They'll get up there and say the kids, but it doesn't serve that child's interest if they don't want to go there. It doesn't serve the other children if that child doesn't want to go there, and they're going to sit there and scream the whole time.
Yeah.
It's like, sure, I'll go to school and spend the entire time in school suspension. Fuck you guys.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's weird.
And obviously people can't hire anyone who's supposed to be at school because then they're contributing it. Was it contributing to truancy? And they're complicit in truancy, I guess.
If they
hire someone,
like a teacher who works at the school to come tutor their kid.
No. If like the kid wants to, I don't know, go out, make a buck or two during the day.
Sure.
If someone hires a kid that they know is supposed to be in school, then they would be contributing to that truancy.
I don't want to hit this point like too long, but I was curious. So like when you said it shouldn't be mandatory, or they should have a choice. The parents should have a choice whether their kids go to school, or the kid should have a choice whether it goes to school, or both.
I mean, by the time you get into your late teens, it sort of becomes both anyway. At that point, there's lots of times kids have power struggles with their parents,
Sure.
right?
Yeah, sure. Especially like, when you're 16, 17 and you're like in your last year of high school and you've got a car and you're driving yourself to school, like your parents won't know if you're going to school or not.
Right.
You could leave the city all day.
Once you're large enough that people have a hard time physically forcing you to go someplace, that's when you have some negotiating power.
So like, I'd feel bad if there wasn't some mandatory education required. And you're saying mandatory schooling, not education. I'm conflating the two. My bad. But yeah, I mean, it should be a crime to like, not teach your kids how to read one way or another, right? If they're capable of learning how to read. But yeah, I guess I could see it being a mess. I don't know.
Should that be a crime?
I would, yeah. I'm kind of prepared to stick that out. I mean,
I'm willing to say that it should be a crime not to get vaccinated because that, is direct impact on the health of everyone around you. But reading, a society is much better off when everyone's literate.
Well, even just like, basic education stuff, basic arithmetic, knowing the alphabet, that sort of shit. Like, it doesn't harm society if you don't get your child medical treatment when it has a cold or an appendicitis and it dies. That's like your fault. You should be charged for that.
Yeah.
If your kid comes out into the world and is, completely useless to, themselves and everybody else. Cause
that's a huge burden on society.
Yeah. And I can rephrase that and not make it so bad on the kid, but like, it's not the kid's fault.
Yeah.
They can't contribute. They can't actualize anywhere because there's not much to do. Even if you can't like read an instruction manual to like work on something, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
I'm prepared to say that if the parents don't make that happen, that it's their fault and that should be a problem.
I'm good with that.
Yeah.
Should be some minimum level of education required.
Yeah.
Some basic literacy and numeracy.
But I think,
and there should be free schools available to help facilitate that.
Yeah. I should read Kaplan's Case Against Education. I think he's very important about drawing the distinction between education and schooling. And when he says that there's too much education, I think there are points, at least where that article that he wrote was saying that there was one sentence by Kaplan where he said that people are too overeducated, but he meant like overschooled, not like they learn too much. That's not a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. The system as it is now isn't great, but it also serves the purpose, like, the Hansonian lens of like, how are you going to sit at your desk and be, shut up and do your job if you haven't had that drilled into you for 15 years?
Yeah.
So,
and it provides some unifying culture that helps keep the country somewhat together.
Yeah. The rosy picture of history you get in, the 10 years that you're taking U.S. history through school.
Yeah.
I think I think they're probably downplaying like the level of like blatant propaganda stuff that they're giving kids, certainly than they were like at my parents' age. My parents both went to school here in the U.S. When they were school aged, and there was a lot of like Red Scare and this like a lot of like big patriotism stuff, way more than just like getting up and doing the Pledge of Allegiance every day. Did they make you do that, by the way?
They did, but I had a religious exemption since I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness.
Oh, and you can't pledge allegiance to anything but God or something, right?
Yeah. It was at the beginning of every school year, my parents had to go in, meet with the teachers, explain, these are our religious beliefs, and then I sat while everyone else stood up and pledged allegiance.
Nice.
So, yeah, I was taught very early to be rebellious and not give fucks.
It's funny how you can do that in a religious context.
Yes. Yeah, every now and then I was just talking with one of my writer friends, and she was like, I wrote this one story which was really violent and had a pro-choice message near the end, and I have it out under a pseudonym because I live down in Texas and all my neighbors would judge me, and I'm like, so fucking let them judge you. Bring it on, motherfuckers. And I have come to realize that people are much less likely to invite that sort of controversy than I usually am, and the religious upbringing was probably at least a part of it. They managed to get their culture into me regardless.
I mean, there are good things you took from it,
Yeah.
like the ability to say no to authority. That's, I think, super valuable.
Yeah. I still have the evangelistic instinct, even though that is, in my opinion, probably a bad thing. Because no one likes being evangelized to.
And yet here we are.
Hey, man, we're just having a chat between friends. It's not our fault if someone else is listening in on it.
Some poor sap downloads and is converted. Did you read this long email, or not long, but a couple paragraphs about your updated beliefs on marriage?
I did, but this was like 2.5 months ago, so refresh me on it.
David wrote in to say, hello, fellow Bayesians. I want to comment on Eneash's updated beliefs about marriage. In the interest of full disclosure, he's talking about how he doesn't go to Reddit. That's fine. My problem with marriage as homemaker protection contract is that I worry that this view neglects the fun theoretic benefits of marriage. I grant that in the modern world, there are a few... sorry. I'm reading over the microphone. It's hard. I grant that in the modern world, there are few and shrinking practical benefits to marriage, and I also grant that a lot of the legal and monetary benefits to marriage are bullshit. But I'd argue that in a world where I raise 3 kids is a valid resume fodder, and there were no legal social pressures to marry or stay married, people would still like to get married, and some would likely stay married for life because of a big ceremony where all your friends gather and watch 2 souls become one, etc., etc. And then following through on those vows is an enjoyable experience. Did I read that in a way that you could understand?
Yeah.
Saying that there are, quote, there are few to no practical benefits to this that aren't bullshit stuff society forces on us, therefore it shouldn't exist, end quote, is too similar to Warhammer 40k's Imperial Truth. Basically, the sequence is about the fun theory, and also why the 40k universe sucks.
Well, there's a lot of reasons why the 40k universe sucks.
I completely respect your personal choice to reject marriage because of your past experiences, but painting with a broad brush to include the whole institution and all those who partake seems to be a bit too Spock or Emperor of Mankind and not enough Jeffrey Sy or Rationalist Harry. I could see a reasonable alternative such as the hand-binding 5-year marriages working out a lot better than the current system and fulfilling the same fun theoretic role as marriage, but conceptualizing marriage as a purely practical contract with no value as a ritual seems ill-advised.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. Some people do enjoy ritual a lot, and would like to go through that ritual. And there's a saying, "Your kink is not my kink," but that's okay. And if that is someone's kink, then they are entirely free to indulge in it. But think about some of the legal things that you are signing up for when you indulge this kink. There's impregnation kinks too, but if you do that, now you're stuck with a kid. So there are some things to think through, and there's some really good rituals out there, and sure, it can definitely lead to a quality of life increase if that is something that you want in your life. Just think it through, and I honestly like a 5-year repeating contract. That's so much a better idea, in my opinion.
I like how you brought it to like a kink, and it's like, if that's the weird thing that gets you off, go for it. Like, all right.
That's not the nicest way to putting it. Kinks are very important and make life better, Sure. And is ritual like a kink? I would kind of think ritual is.
I think we spent 2 hours and I still don't really know what a ritual is.
Yeah, no.
I sucked at it. And someone wrote in that you should have tabooed ritual, and they're absolutely right. And I'm trying to be better about that going forward.
Okay.
About tabooing confusing words, which is to say, can we have this conversation without using that word and just talk about the actual thing?
So what actually thing is it? It's a...
I wanted something that encompasses like or that if it encompasses brushing your teeth and getting married, I don't think that's a useful word, right?
Yeah.
So like, I don't know, something that is above and beyond for the purpose of ceremony, but that sounds like another tabooable word.
I guess in this case, the closest thing would be a large group event with emotional meaning to commemorate milestones as they happen.
Yeah.
Or,
no one
or
watching
life
brush my
changes
teeth,
as
so.
they happen.
Yeah, that could be a good version. Yeah. I think Cannonball Jenkins brought up a bunch of examples about like concerts and stuff maybe being similar, and no one's watching your personal growth or something, but you're all sharing in that moment. Maybe is what something that he would say.
Yeah.
And
I think
that does rule out
different
brushing my teeth,
meanings.
so that's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can dig it. I think I had another thing to say about how you were.
I was wording my particular answer.
No, I thought it was funny, but I was going to say something else. But I see what you're saying, and I like the idea. I have a friend who did the 5-year hand wrap thing. I think that's kind of fun.
Cool.
I think you could kind of distill your argument down into like a hard version and a soft version.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the soft version is very easily palatable, which is like, be aware that this is not just like a fun thing you're doing with somebody that you love and that your family is invited to this big party. Yeah. It's a binding contract that has a huge ledger of shit that you didn't know was in it, probably.
Yeah. And more than anything else, I want to divorce the idea. Divorce. I want to divorce the idea that love and marriage are commingled.
Sure.
In any way that you can love someone and not get married, and you can marry someone and not love them, and those things shouldn't be conflated. I'm really annoyed by the fact that society has as a default, if you love someone, you marry them. And if you didn't marry them, then you don't really love them.
Yeah, same here.
That would be my number one thing that I would like to burn down out of, or remove from the whole marriage shenanigans.
Yeah, it does seem weird that,
because then people wouldn't feel nearly as much pressure. They would get married if they wanted the legal things or the ritual enjoyment of that particular thing.
Yeah, that is interesting.
I mean, when I got married, it was because, well, I love this person, right? Yeah.
That should be why people do it. I totally agree. Not because, well, my friends and family won't think I really love this person if I don't do this.
Well, no, but that was a stupid reason for me to get married.
No, that's what I'm saying. Well, no, you did it because you love the person you said.
Yeah, and I think that's a stupid reason to get married. You should get married if you want the legal things that it brings, and or if you're just into that sort of ritual, I guess, also would be another reason. But if you love someone, that should not compel you to marry them, because love and marriage have nothing to do with each other.
I see. Yeah, I read too much of what you're saying. I got that, like...
It's also the opposite of what you normally hear from everywhere. Normally people say, oh yeah, that's the only reason you should marry someone is if you marry them. I'm like, no, the only reason you should marry them is if you want these particular legal things to suddenly be enforced in your life. Love should be a thing that you do separate from that.
I immediately drew the other connection, and I think I need some more deprogramming to totally get where you're coming. No, I think that's important. Yeah, I was thinking more like, if it's the kind of thing that like you want and will make you and your partner happy, then it's like, yeah, go for it. But know what you're getting into. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can dig it.
Okay,
cool.
Did we have any other feedback, or is that it for today?
We only did 2, didn't we? We can probably find one more.
I think we did 3.
Yeah, you're right. One was just feedback. One, it wasn't really, we didn't talk about it much. Let me see here.
One was someone agreeing with Audrey, who I was arguing against. I see how it is. My listeners turning on me.
I liked her a lot too. I thought that, if her schooling, the way that she schools educates is half as legit as what she's putting off, then that sounds awesome. Mm-hmm. I think everybody who goes there is super lucky and benefits a lot. I do think that either the institution has changed a lot in the last decade, which I don't think it has, because I know people who are still in school and they're super bored, like my cousin. But it could just be that like Cheyenne isn't caught up with this fun school that she teaches at. But I think that she was being too, I think she's generalizing too much from like, I think her school and the way that her education system does it is
unusual to say the least.
It's an outlier, and she's generalizing from that.
Yeah.
When that stops being an outlier, that sounds really cool.
When I asked, are there any teachers I know who would like to come on and talk about this subject? And she replied, I told her, I think you're probably the worst teacher that I know for this, because you have the most unusual school, but she was also the one who was most willing to defend schooling, probably because, of the fact that her school's pretty awesome. The other couple teachers I knew were like, no, I don't want to go on that podcast.
Yeah, I think the obvious bar there is that for somebody coming on who doesn't like the school that they work at, but they wanted to teach because of, you know, like the ambition of like, it is a really cool thing. I was attracted to the idea too. But I talked to teachers in college who are like, you know, I can't teach whatever I want because they just hand me a syllabus and it's fucking stupid. And I'm going to do my best to actually teach you guys something, but we've got to pass these tests that I don't get to write. So like, that doesn't sound fun.
Yeah.
I could totally dig more of like a tutoring thing or a private school thing if I was ever to do that. But currently that's not the track I'm on. So
Going way back to Not Without Incidents comment, he also mentioned that they had to create a high school / military academy to put Greek teenage boys in because they were causing so much trouble. Which, first of all, I don't think says good things about school if you're basically using it to as a holding place for your troublemakers. But I recall, was it Marcus Aurelius? Yes, I believe it was Marcus Aurelius, one of the Roman emperors. Said that one of the best things that happened in his life was he was not sent to the normal schooling that everyone else in Rome gets, and that preserved his actual joy of learning and didn't destroy, you know, his childhood. So schooling has been kind of shitty for a long time, I get the feeling.
yeah, I mean, I imagine back then too, there was probably similar problems, but
Oh my
there's
God.
probably more
Do you want
focus
to
on
hear about some of the shit they did in Rome?
so much.
They would make people memorize the alphabet, like the forms, the letters, what they look like, before they knew what they were or what they were good for. Like you just have to remember that this is an A, this is the shapes an A consists of, and you don't know that it's a letter in a word or anything. It's only after you have everything memorized that then they start telling you, okay, this makes this sound and this is combined with other words. And it's like, why am I just randomly memorizing stupid shapes without any way to connect them or use them in the real world?
And I sort of doubt that they did any empiricist observations of like, this was the optimal way to teach reading.
Oh, God, no.
This is probably just like,
And the kids were beat if they didn't get it fast enough. And it was a one of those grueling memorized things that do not matter to you at all sort of things.
that's something we didn't even touch on, and I'm sure Audrey would probably agree, I'm guessing, but like corporal punishment was super popular just a few decades ago, and it's mostly gone now, but not entirely. I'm not sure if it's gone out of every public school or not. It might be. But it used to be, you know, you get hit, sometimes super fucking hard. And my dad told me one, you know, like where they would bring the kid up to the front of the class and paddle them.
Yeah.
And, you know, he's not that old. He's in his 50s. So, you know, 30-ish years ago, 40-ish years ago, they were pulling kids up to, you know, hit them really hard in front of their classmates, which, like, as far as the domestication thing, that certainly adds a lot of credence to that hypothesis for why schooling is the way it is.
I am very much against violence, physical violence, so I would not come out in favor of that in any way. But there is a problem that a lot of ways right now schools don't have credible ways to, I believe it was put, maybe it was even on Scott Alexander's blog, someone said though that schools don't have a credible way to disincentivize bad behavior.
Because suspension is like, cool, I'll go play video games for 3 days, fuck you.
Right. And lots of times the teacher can't suspend someone because then all the stats look worse. You can't even send them to the principal's office because then everyone would be in the principal's office and the principal doesn't give that many fucks. And they just, what can they do? Yell at the kid and tell him to shut up? If the kid doesn't shut up, then what?
Yeah, I don't remember suspension ever being that big of a deal. I was in the principal's office a lot in elementary and junior high school. I remember I was only suspended once in elementary school, or I was out of school suspended. And that was a time where, like, you know, I was like bullies and she was like, you know, just hit him back or whatever. And it was like finally one of the things, like, no one was really seriously hurt. This was like one of like the least violent altercations, but somehow we both got suspended for it. And my mom was like, cool, you play video games all day. This is totally fine. I totally support this. But, you know, and she was a stay-at-home mom at the time. She didn't start working until I was most of the way through junior high or something. So, like, if both my parents worked, then, like, out-of-school suspension is just a huge bonus. Yeah. And, like, oh, I have to catch up on my classwork? Oh, no. And then in-school suspension, you just hang out and read. I bet they take your phones now. I didn't have a smartphone back then. But I remember one day in ISS, in-school suspension, I was somewhat intimately familiar with it, so I needed a shorter moniker for it. But I read the entirety of the Order of Phoenix in one day.
Oh, neat.
Because I had nothing else to do. And I think it was one of my like rereads. I kind of, was able to skim through parts of it. Yeah. But I'm like, all right, cool. I reread this whole fucking book. Can I go now? Yeah, that's not a very strong disincentivizer. But I guess I don't know what else would be, because what do kids care about that they can take from them? Like the teacher doesn't.
Oh, my dad was pretty good at taking away things I cared about.
Your dad was, but your teachers couldn't.
No,
right?
Your teachers can't.
So, yeah, I mean, your parents have control over everything that you have. So, I don't know what kids like: video games, phones, and computers and stuff. Yeah. So, like, and TVs. I mean, your parents could take all that, but your teacher, I'm not sure if there's probably laws about it now, but smartphones were just coming out when I was getting through high school. So there wasn't anything at the time. Like, they would try and take phones, and it was like questionable whether or not they could. If you're like cheating on a test, they'll take it. But like if you're just on it, I'm not sure if there's much they could do. There probably is now. But I mean, they probably have to give it back at the end of class, maybe the end of the day. I'm not sure how it works.
Do kids bust out smartphones while they're taking a test?
I'm sure they do.
It's okay. That seems a bit shady.
Oh, I'm sure that
looking up the answers.
Kids don't care about passing the tests because they know it, right? They want to not fail because they're told that, like, if you fail, your world will end and you'll just starve to death in the streets.
I'd be surprised that a teacher wouldn't be, sitting around watching.
Oh, they do. They probably get caught.
They do.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I
guess, kids have been cheating since the beginning of time, and teachers have been trying to stop it since the beginning of time. All right.
I saw a great picture on Reddit where, like, so the Nintendo Switch has a little stand on the back of it, like on the little portable screen, and you can detach the remotes and play with them independently. They don't have to be touching each other or the console. Okay. And there was a kid in a hoodie leaning back, and his backpack was ajar, and he had the Switch standing up in it, and his hands in his hoodie pockets playing like Mario. And the guy behind him took a picture of, like, look at this kid. He's sitting in class, but he's playing Super Mario Odyssey. It was awesome.
Neat.
So yeah, kids get creative. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. If you can't, I don't think hitting kids is the solution either, but what else could you do? Yeah. Probably not much. I don't know. We haven't thought about it for 5 minutes.
Yeah. I mean, if school wasn't mandatory, you could say, get the fuck out of here.
And eventually they do. Mm-hmm. Some kids get expelled.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the recourse is for the parents at that point. There's probably some loophole for if your kid was too much of a nonconformist.
I think then you have to educate them at home.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a whole thing.
Yeah.
Well, that's super happy, exciting stuff. Oh, we have time, if you want, to do a Rationally Speaking pick. I know you have a ledger to get through.
Yes, I do have one. In fact, that was one of the big things that I want to do here. You said that you didn't want to call them Rationally Speaking picks because that's too much stealing off Julie Galef?
It's explicitly stealing off of Julie Galef.
Right. Did you want to call them like Rat Chat?
I think that's fun.
Okay. Yeah. Like Rationalist Chat about random shit.
While you're digging it up, there was something I saw on Reddit, and I can try and dig it up if we want the link, but it was just it was some guy who taught his daughters, like, he was like trying to test the hypothesis that if he like ingrained this into a kid enough, they could be a master of anything.
Oh, the chess dude?
The chess thing. And I think the 2 of his 3 daughters came out to be like world champions, or at least world like champion competitors. And I thought that was kind of interesting because my sister's pregnant. She should be giving birth any minute now. And any minute as in any day. But it was fun to think about because I guess it depends on the subject. And so I read through all the comments. I rarely do. Like, I'll skim them, but I read through a lot of them because it was really interesting. Mm-hmm. And I mean, all he showed really in this small sample is that you can teach something like chess that's, learnable by a child and have to compete with each other for 15 years and get awesome, right? Mm-hmm. But whether or not that would work for something like, I don't know, economics or something is probably debatable. Yeah. But it is kind of fun to think that, I think...
and both that guy and his wife were geniuses already, so their kids were probably going to be geniuses too.
Right. I think John Stuart Mill had a very atypical education to the point where, like, he had like a mental breakdown or something in his late teens or early 20s. But he was one of those, like, I think I've heard at least once or twice, and this is obviously hyperbole, but like he was the last person in the world to know everything there was to know. Because back then there was less to know, and it was, I mean, he didn't know obviously everything. He didn't know all the languages, but he knew a lot. And I think it was fair to say that he was not an autodidact, an eclectic expert in a lot of subjects. But when the human domain of knowledge is smaller, that's easier. Mm-hmm. But part of it, I think, was due to his insane education as a kid. So, yeah. All right, what do you got?
I have, this is by Bound Up over at, I believe this was at Lesser Wrong back in the day, which will make it at Less Wrong now, since Lesser Wrong got incorporated into Less Wrong.
Or was it the other way around?
Lesser Wrong got put back into Less Wrong.
Because people hated the name?
I think it was always originally meant as like a startup to see if it'll work, and if it does work, we'll use it to revitalize Less Wrong.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't like Lesser Wrong anyway. I liked what it did. I liked what it was doing, but I hated the name.
Yeah.
Less Wrong makes sense. What does Lesser Wrong even mean?
It's, the next iteration of Less Wrong, and the next one will be Lessest Wrong. So.
And I think there's already a blog. There's definitely probably a blog with this name, but like the obvious one out of trust is like More Right.
There is.
Come on.
The More Right one is is mainly new reactionaries and other right-leaning people.
Oh, shoot.
So it's a double pun. Yeah.
All right.
And I guess Lesser Wrong, also kind of a pun about you must choose the lesser wrong when it's confronted with two evils.
Okay, I can dig that.
Yeah. But the title of this post is Maps versus Buttons, Nerds versus Normies. And is a way of thinking about the other half of the population, which I found interesting, and I suspect is not charitable enough. It feels mean, is basically what I'm trying to say.
Who are the two halves of the population?
Nerds and normies.
I mean, can you expand on that? Like rationalists and everyone else?
Yeah, well, people... In fact, let me just cover the actual thing where this is discussed. They said that they were having a conversation with a friend, and they noticed some inconsistencies with the friend's beliefs of what they were saying. And they were like, dude, the two things you say totally contradict each other. And the friend was like, oh, okay, I see. All right, thanks. And they were like, okay, cool. I helped clear up something in their beliefs and their map of the world. This is awesome. But then sometime later, they were talking with them, and they still had those two contradictory beliefs. And they pointed it out again, and it was like, oh, okay, thanks. Awesome. And then sometime later, they talked to them again, and they still had those beliefs. And he was like, what the hell is going on? And he talked with his friend for a bit, and he says that from his friend's point of view, what happened was that they were having a discussion, and his friend showed respect to him by asking about his opinion. And at some point, he pointed out, kind of like a pedantic schoolboy, that there was some sort of inconsistency, which is, whatever, some sort of weird logical rule. And so he's like, oh, okay, thanks. And then I showed respect for him by saying thank you for pointing that out to me, and everything seemed to be well resolved. So they just went along in their relationship, and he the main purpose of the conversation seemed to be about the relationship between the two of them, as opposed to their relationship with knowledge about the world. And so that was what he updated, as opposed to any belief about the world. And he says, he makes the analogy between maps and buttons, because when someone asks him, and I'm assuming you or most rationalists, what their beliefs on a subject are, we consult our mental map of the world, right, and of ourselves, and we produce on the fly a description of what that map says. This produces, he says, conceptually consistent answers, as consistent as the map is, which in most people's cases most of our cases is very consistent, because we like to keep our maps consistent. And also, the answers are often a bit clunky and unwieldy, since they are being constructed on the fly. Now, the other people, the normies, as he calls them, are not making maps of the world in their head. They aren't constructing these beliefs. They're more like a big wall of buttons. You push a button, and a slip of paper comes out. And the button you push is the question you ask them, and the slip of paper that comes out is the opinion that they have on that, which has been oftentimes granted to them by their tribe or people that they respect. And he said their effort goes into not making their maps as consistent and as accurate with the world as they observe it as possible, but on refining what's on the slips of paper, and refining that based on the status of the person that they're talking to and their reaction.
And there's no relationship between any one button and that corresponding paper and another button and its corresponding paper.
Exactly. Yeah. And so he claims that in a very real sense, normal people don't have beliefs. If we're talking about things where they don't need to be factually right to prosper, they don't have real beliefs at all. But they sustain a convincing illusion of having beliefs, because when they say, what's your belief on gender equality, they produce a nice shiny answer that sounds like it's saying something. And the main thing is that these response beliefs on papers are there in an attempt to signal which groups you owe fealty to. Who's your in-group, who's the out-group, and it's a social reality as opposed to corresponding in any way to physical reality. So nerds are constantly embarrassing themselves according to social rules because they're, betraying their allies or not properly signaling the correct adherence to the correct ideas in order to have some sort of status. And nerds think that normal people are embarrassing themselves because they don't have any sort of consistent beliefs or ideas worth listening to. And that is the problem, that nerds think of normal people as failed nerds, whereas normal people think of nerds as failed normal people.
Well,
that
that's
normal
sort of
people think
disheartening.
nerds are trying to signal and impress and are just being really shitty at it.
That's sort of disheartening. That's interesting. I think you're right. It might be too disingenuous to say that, or like too, what was the word that you used?
Uncharitable?
Uncharitable. To say this is just a problem with normal people. Because I'm sure I have those too.
Yeah.
But the difference is that, like, if someone pointed out to me, hey, Steven, you said something different that doesn't match up with what you said just now a week ago, I'd be like, oh shit, hold on, you're right. One of these doesn't make sense. I can't keep both of these, and I won't repeat both of them again. Whereas apparently, assuming this person's rendition is true, some people will just be like, cool, yeah, and just power through and to come back up again later.
I think we just talked about this a few days ago, the transracial stuff. There's also no reason people couldn't be transracial. And yeah, I'm okay with that.
And I drew it to the extreme that if you think people can be other animals,
right,
it would be insane to say, oh, this person's a bird, but this person can't be black if their skin's white.
Yeah. Whereas most people would be like, yeah, I'm down with transgender people, but anyone who thinks that they're transracial can go eat a giant load of bowl. Now I can't say giant load of dicks because that seems kind of shitty to say. A giant bowl of turds. How about that?
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah, the kickback to that, I think, would be, something along the lines of cultural appropriation, or like, it's okay for you to say you're black, but you're not actually suffering with what they're suffering with. And that's definitely true. There's certainly a problem that I wouldn't know how to tackle there. And I realize I come from this lofty position where I can just say, oh yeah, everyone should just be, take it easy and be nice to each other. And then all our problems will go away. It sounds like super hippie. But that's because, I'm not getting a lot of shit every day. I was going to see the Avengers a couple weekends ago, and
the newest one, Infinity War.
Yeah,
and I hear it's worth seeing, and I really got to go see it.
Yeah, but first you and I need to watch Ragnarok.
Yes, I have heard that as well.
And if you want to watch it together, I was going to pitch that later, but we should watch it together.
Okay.
'Cause we never actually watched a TV show or movie together.
No.
And I think you'd have fun with this. It's not an everyday superhero movie.
Cool.
But I went with
maybe Sunday.
I'm down.
Okay.
Oh, I'm a bit. Well, I'll figure something out.
Okay.
But I went with 5 other people, and one of them was black, and the girl the older woman taking our tickets asked to, like, if he could step aside, she could, he could open his backpack. But he was the first person to enter in my group with a backpack.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
And then the person behind him goes in and she has a backpack. The next guy has a backpack. Someone else comes in with a purse. And so I asked her, after this guy, he just held it open. It's like a laptop. I'm like, all right, cool, go ahead. And I asked her, I was like, this was like after everyone was, I didn't want to make it like a scene with him right there, but I kind of was just hanging out waiting for the last person in our party to show up. And I was like, how did you ask him and not no one else? It's like, oh, people check with backpacks. The bigger the backpack, the more I check. And I was like, both of their backpacks are twice the size of his, like, laptop bag. Yeah. And she's like, oh, well, there's no real recipe. You know, there's not like a rule. There's, you know, it's just kind of like, you know, if someone comes in wearing shades or if they, you know, whatever. And, you know, the stuff
if someone comes in with darker skin.
that's what fucking happened.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know, and this is like the mildest case of racial profiling out there. You know, he wasn't held up, he wasn't frisked, but it was just like, you know, this was the dumbest fucking thing I'd ever seen. And, you know, if you're profiling for like risky looking people, I mean, one of the guys that came in rode into the building on a skateboard and he was high as shit. And like, you know, I mean, anyway, so I bring up that long digression to point out that it's easy for me to say like, oh yeah, you know, if my white friend wants to go out there and say he's black when it's comfortable for him and when he gets whatever benefit he wants from saying that, or if that's how he actually feels or something, if he's expressing a feeling that's different from like people across the street passing judgment on you.
No, I think
So I can totally see the reaction to that particular thing, even if I think that in an ideal world nobody should give a shit.
Right.
And maybe our friends who would say that is a problem, transracialism shouldn't be a thing right now. Maybe they would concede that yes, in an ideal world that's great.
Okay.
I assume. Maybe many of them wouldn't. They'd say in an ideal world everyone lives in racially segregated boxes and white people are on the bottom. I don't know, but.
Well, I could certainly see conceptually, theoretically, transracialism could totally be a thing. But, you know, on the other hand, I guess there is also the thing, well, like, I can just say that I'm a woman to get the discount or, you know.
Can I tell you about a time I did that too?
No, what did you do?
So first of all, I'm sure someone's going to notice that, like, oh, Stephen just brought up, like, the mildest thing of, like, racial profiling and saying that he discovered race problems. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm bringing up the most recent incident that happened to me a couple of weeks ago, or happened near me, rather. So I was with a friend, like, a year ago. They wanted to stop by a pot shop. I was getting a ride home. And they were like, oh yeah, it's Women's Wednesdays, you know, women get 20% off. And I was like, I wasn't going to buy anything, but I was like, oh. And I see the guy behind the counter. I was like, if I say I'm a woman, can I get 20% off? And he's like, oh, I don't really, you know, he kind of just like, oh, I don't know how to answer this question. And he's like, I don't think we can do that. And he just seemed really uncomfortable. And I thought about pushing it and just being like, no. But I didn't want to be disingenuous and be a dick about it.
Right.
But it was funny because, like you'd said, you know, if there was a time where you could do it once a month, you know, ladies' night at the bar or something and get $1 drink or something as opposed to $9 drink, then, you know, people would be taking advantage of it and would be taking it away from the people who like actually feel this way and want this accepted about them, right? So it's a whole weird thing.
It is.
I don't have a good answer for this other than a couple stupid stories. So
yeah. Okay, that got digressed quite a bit. But yeah, he also said at the very bottom, basically the same thing you said, that I've spoken as if people are in one camp or the other, but it's more of a spectrum. It might be more correct to say that people are on a spectrum of nerdy normal for each specific topic. For example, humans manage to be nerdy about politics and religion. And definitely a lot of people do. We tend to call them wonks, you know, the people that are really nerdy about politics. But people who are nerdy in some ways can turn into political animals and social thinkers when you bring up anything controversial, like what the best Star Wars movie is. And a normal person might well become nerdy and actually try to learn how some things really work if they happen to be interested in a topic for some reason. And yeah, I think the nice thing about dichotomy type posts is that they can open your eyes to new ways of thinking about things. And you always have to put at the very bottom, by the way, this is not how the real world works. There's always spectrums and, you know, nebulous cases, but this is just a way to think about things and start noticing stuff like does this person actually have a real belief or are they pushing a button?
yeah, that's an interesting way to think about it.
And am I just pushing a button and regurgitating something that I heard?
I was going to say something like that now we're going to be at the point where we can ask our friends at our meetups and be like, are you just pushing a button for this right now? Or is this your actual belief? How does this tie into your network of other beliefs?
Yeah. Do you actually think that transporters are murder or are you just pushing a button?
And now people, you know, now the nerds will be armed with a new, you know, rhetorical device where the normal people aren't going to read this post because they don't read posts like this.
Yes.
So it's going to be
we can isolate ourselves even further.
Exactly.
Well, I think our job here is complete.
I think so.
Stephen, thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you for joining me. Thanks for letting us do this together. This was a lot of fun.
Cool.
And thank you to our listeners for joining us.
Hell
I think
yeah.
this was kind of energetic and fun.
Neat. You finally thanked the people for listening.
I always appreciate them listening.
Okay. Because I always say thanks, bye. And you're like, I ain't saying bye to people who aren't in the room.
It feels weird to like sign off that way, but I hope it's never been clear, or I hope it's never been misunderstood that like I don't appreciate that people like the show.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure they know you appreciate them.
Oh, I thought Steven hated us. What the fuck's he going there every other week to do this for?
Yeah. He's just trying to have a private conversation with Eneash.
Eneash records everything.
Oh, as a quick note, we do oftentimes reach out to people to get them on the podcast for interviews or whatever, but a few times we've had people reach out to us instead. Like, I did not know about Metaculus, but the Metaculus people contacted us and said, hey, this is some cool stuff you might be interested in. And we said, sure, come on the podcast. So if you also have anything cool like that you want to talk about, we may be willing to talk with you. Just drop us a line.
Yeah, by all means. That sounds great.
Cool. And or if you like the podcast, review us on iTunes.
Yeah, it's really easy. Helps us get more higher in the search results. And there's that. There's the email address, the Bayesian Conspiracy Podcast @gmail.com, the subreddit r/the Bayesian Conspiracy.
You can chat with other people and accuse them of pushing buttons.
Yes, and I want that to be a thing. And then the website, BayesianConspiracyPodcast.com, right?
Mm-hmm. And of course, we're on Patreon.
That too, yeah.